The sun bled into the Texas horizon, stretching long shadows across the wide plains and turning the dust of the ranch road into streaks of gold. The McAllister ranch sat quiet after a hard day's work, its fences mended and cattle finally driven into their pens. The smell of sweat, leather, and the faint sweetness of mesquite drifted on the evening breeze. From the porch of the house, Luke McAllister sat heavy in his chair, boots planted on the worn boards, a glass of whiskey catching the last glint of daylight. His face, weathered by years of sun and hardship, was set in the stillness of a man both watchful and weary. Inside, Clara stood near the window, her slender frame rigid against the lace curtain. She had spent her whole life under the vast, unending sky, where the winds told tales older than any soul could remember, but tonight even the air seemed to close in on her. She could hear the faint creak of the rocking chair outside, the scrape of Luke's boot heel against the porch, the kind of small sounds that reminded her how constant he had always been, strong, steady, a man she could depend on. And yet her heart pounded as though she were about to face a firing squad. Her hands trembled against the fabric of her shawl. For months she had buried the truth, hoping that time would smother it deep enough to never rise again. She had smiled when Luke looked at her with that quiet trust in his eyes, had ridden beside him through dust storms and cold rains, all the while carrying a secret like a stone against her chest. But now, something inside her had broken. She could no longer bear the weight. Pushing open the door, Clara stepped out onto the porch. The boards creaked beneath her feet, and Luke turned his head, his sharp gray eyes softening when they met hers. For a moment she almost faltered, almost retreated back into silence. But her voice, though low and unsteady, carried the force of all the nights she had lain awake with guilt gnawing at her soul. "Luke," she whispered, and then louder, with a desperation that startled even her, "Luke, I can't hold it back anymore." Luke straightened, setting his glass down beside him. His brow furrowed, reading the storm in her trembling hands, the quiver in her lips. "What is it, Clara?" His voice was gravel, low and steady, but beneath it was a flicker of concern. Her throat tightened. She stepped closer, her eyes glistening as the prairie wind lifted strands of her hair and tugged at the hem of her dress. "I'll give you everything, my love, my land, my very soul, but you must know the truth." The words tumbled out, sharp and raw. Luke rose from his chair, the wood groaning under the sudden shift of his weight. His gaze hardened, not in anger but in wary expectation, the kind a man gets when he feels the ground shifting beneath him. Her voice cracked as she pressed the shawl tighter to her chest. "The man you think you killed last winter in the canyon, the outlaw in the black hat, he wasn't just some nameless rider. He was my brother, Luke." The silence that followed seemed to stretch across the plains themselves. The sounds of the cattle shifting in their pen, the distant cry of a night bird, even the whisper of the wind, all of it seemed to vanish, leaving only the weight of her confession between them. Luke's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing as memories of that night came flooding back. He remembered the ambush in the canyon, the gunfire exploding in the dark, the figure falling from his saddle into the dust. He had always believed it was just another outlaw, another man who chose the path of banditry and met the fate that came with it. Now, hearing Clara's voice tremble with grief, the memory twisted into something crueler, heavier than the weight of lead. "Your brother," he muttered, almost to himself, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. Clara's tears slipped down her cheeks, though her voice grew stronger, steadier, as if speaking the truth gave her the courage she thought she'd lost. "Yes, I never told you because I knew it would change everything. He rode with men I begged him to leave, men who had already lost their souls to greed and violence. He swore he'd never come back. But he did, and when you met him in that canyon, fate chose the worst of both our worlds." Luke turned away, his hand tightening on the porch rail. The wood creaked under the pressure, his knuckles white. For the first time in years, he felt a wound deeper than any bullet could carve. "You should have told me, Clara." All this time, his voice trailed, gravelly and sharp. She stepped closer, reaching for his arm, her touch trembling. "I thought I could bury it, that if I just held on, the past would fade. But the past doesn't die out here. It rides on the wind, and it's found its way back to us." Luke's head lifted, his eyes narrowing at the horizon. Clara followed his gaze and froze. Dust rose in the distance, fast, deliberate, too many hooves to be stray cattle. The sound grew louder, a thunder across the plains, a storm on horseback. Her heart slammed against her ribs as she clutched Luke's sleeve. "They're coming, Luke, his men, his blood, and they won't stop until they've taken everything. The whiskey glass sat forgotten on the porch rail, the evening quiet shattered by the promise of violence. The truth had finally been spoken, but with it came a reckoning that neither of them could escape. Night came heavy and thick, cloaking the plains in a shroud of darkness pierced only by the thin sliver of a moon. The McAllister ranch lay tense under the weight of what was coming, every shadow stretching long and mean as if the land itself knew blood was about to be spilled. Lanterns flickered along the porch, casting shaky halos of gold light across the wooden boards. Luke McAllister stood at the gate, his rifle in hand, his broad shoulders squared against the chill wind. Behind him, the house loomed tall and silent, but the pounding of hooves grew louder with each passing second, rattling the earth like the drums of war. Clara stood just inside the doorway, her breath shallow, her shawl clutched close around her trembling body. She had never felt so torn. Guilt gnawed at her for keeping the secret so long, but fear for Luke's life drowned everything else. As the thunder of riders drew near, she stepped out onto the porch, unwilling to hide in the safety of walls while the man she loved faced danger alone. The riders came fast and hard, 6 shadows on horseback, their coats whipping behind them like dark banners. As they pulled up before the ranch, dust rose thick, blurring the lantern light. One man dismounted, tall and broad, his face half hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, a pistol gleaming at his side. His voice cut through the night, deep and cold. "Luke McAllister," he called, his words rolling like thunder, "you took blood that wasn't yours to take. Now we've come for ours. Hand over the woman, or this ranch burns to the ground before dawn." Luke stepped forward, planting his boots firm in the dirt. His voice, calm but sharp as a whetted blade, carried over the silence. "This ranch stands on my sweat and blood. You won't take a thing from it. Not her, not the land, not a damn fence post." The men laughed, cruel and low, their horses tossing nervously as if they sensed the tension ready to snap. The leader sneered, spitting into the dirt. "Then you'll watch it all fall. That's the way of blood. One of ours for one of yours." Before Luke could speak, Clara surged forward, her voice cracking with both fury and desperation. "No, this isn't his burden, it's mine. The man Luke killed was my brother, but he chose his path long before that night. Don't you lay his sins at Luke's feet." The men turned their eyes to her, their laughter echoing hollow against the dark. One of them, a scarred rider with a twisted grin, leaned low in his saddle. "So it's true. The lady speaks with fire. But fire won't save him. Blood demands blood." Her hands trembled, but her voice rose, fierce and unwavering now. "I'll give you everything. The deeds to my land, the gold my family left, every scrap of wealth I own. Take it all, just leave Luke out of this." Luke's chest tightened at her words. He saw in her eyes not just fear but the raw, unbreakable love that drove her to sacrifice everything. But he could not allow it. He shifted his rifle, his gaze hard as steel. "No one here gives you a damn thing. You want to test fate? Then step closer." The standoff stretched, silence drawn taut like a bowstring ready to snap. The leader's hand twitched toward his holster, and in that heartbeat of stillness, time seemed to freeze. Then it shattered, the outlaw's gun flashed, but Luke's rifle was quicker. The blast tore through the night, echoing like thunder across the plains. The leader staggered, clutching his chest, before collapsing into the dirt. Chaos erupted, horses screamed, gunfire cracked like firecrackers across the ranch yard. Luke fired again, the rifle bucking against his shoulder. Clara, heart pounding, seized the pistol Luke kept on the porch and aimed with shaking hands. She squeezed the trigger, and the shot rang true, sending one of the riders tumbling from his horse. The outlaws shouted curses, bullets whistling past the porch, splinters flying as wood shattered. Luke ducked low, firing steady, every shot deliberate, every move honed by years of hard living. Clara stood beside him, fear swallowed by the fury of survival, her hands steadier with each pull of the trigger. Together, they fought not just for the ranch but for the bond forged in blood and secrets. The dust grew thick, the smoke choking the air. One outlaw fell, another fled into the night with his horse wild beneath him. The scarred rider, desperate and snarling, charged the porch with a blade in hand. Clara's breath hitched, but before the steel could reach her, Luke's rifle roared, dropping the man where he stood. At last, the chaos waned. The yard lay scattered with bodies and the acrid stench of gunpowder. 2 men had escaped into the darkness, their hoofbeats fading into the distance. 3 others lay still in the dirt, and one writhed, wounded, moaning for mercy. The ranch was scarred, lantern glass shattered, porch boards splintered, the gate half torn from its hinges, but it still stood. Luke lowered his rifle, chest heaving, his shirt clinging with sweat and the sting of blood from a graze along his arm. Clara dropped the pistol, her knees weak, but when Luke turned to her, she lifted her chin, her eyes burning with tears and fire both. He reached for her, pulling her into his arms, his grip as steady as the earth beneath them. They stood together in the ruin of the night, the secret between them still heavy, still sharp, but no longer able to divide. They had faced the storm, and though it left scars, they had not broken. As the first pale light of dawn crept across the plains, painting the sky in soft hues of silver and rose, Luke pressed his forehead to hers and whispered low. "Whatever comes, Clara, we'll stand together. That's a promise." The Wild West was cruel, unforgiving, a land where past sins rode the wind and blood never dried easy. But in that moment, on a battered porch before a scarred ranch, two hearts held fast against it all, knowing they had faced darkness and found the strength to endure.